One.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Thursday Collective. We have a good group here today. Mark Pellegrino, welcome.
Thank you.
We have Amanda Maxim,
Yo.
Jonathan Honig,
Great to be with you.
and special guest Paul Gay, who you probably know from the creator of the amazing movie Liar Liar, a bunch of other stuff you've heard of, and also appropriately enough for our topic today, screenwriting teacher. Paul, good to meet you.
Don, it's good to meet you as well. That's a magnificent beard.
It's my number one aspiration in life.
You've achieved it.
The title today is deliberately provocative. Why do movies suck? Which none of you had a choice about, and you might not endorse. So let's start right there. So, I mean, this is kind of a common claim, and in a sense, it's trivially true, right? Like in any field, most of what exists sucks, and only a very small sliver of it is any good. But I think the more common view is basically movies used to be amazing, now they're horrible. What say you, Paul, our special guest?
Well, I love generalizations like that because generalizations are always true. To some extent, there is less choice in movie going than there used to be. When you've got Disney, which has Pixar and Lucasfilm, and you've got the Marvel universe, there's a lot of those films that are getting made because they're making tons of money. Arguably, there are fewer films at the margins, low budget films that are getting made. When I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, there was an appetite for relatively low budget, kind of more artistic films. They were often director driven, although I would prefer that they had been writer driven. But there was more willingness to experiment. And there's a feeling now that studios would rather spend $250 million on a Marvel film that's going to gross $1 billion or $1.5 billion than spend $1 million on a low budget film and get a return on investment of 10 or 20 or 30 times that. They're looking for, instead of looking for singles or doubles or triples, they're looking for home runs. I'm a fan of a lot of the big movies that come out. So for me, it's not all doom and gloom, but it is significantly harder to get original material made than it certainly at any point since I got into the film industry. People are looking for projects based on IP, intellectual property, that audiences are familiar with. And studios would much rather sell people the latest iteration of Iron Man or Spider-Man than educate audiences as to what is this new drama? What is this new comedy that's coming out? And the box office reactions to films like West Side Story and Del Toro's newest one, Nightmare Alley, are not really encouraging for what it is that we're looking for. There's a feeling that if you're aiming for an adult audience, that it's harder to get. And I think it's partly because of the lockdown insanity that's going on, because the target audience is afraid to go into theaters, or going into theaters is a much less pleasant experience than it used to be. But to a large extent, it's that the people with money are less willing to roll the dice on new and original material.
I mean, one question I would ask you, like, do you think a film like Liar Liar could get made today? Because it's not like a small indie film, right? Like it's kind of this over the top comedy, but it's, resonated with now like 25, 30 years of people. And I don't like, my read is it just doesn't fit into any of the clear pegs for films today.
We saw it as a small art film, and we were devastated when it became a big popular hit because we're against that. It's interesting that you mentioned that, though, because Brian Grazer at some point, I don't know if it was, Brian Grazer was the producer. It was his company Imagine that made the film. And at some point in either the 90s, later in the 90s or in the early 2000s, he said in an interview, he said something like, I don't know what makes comedy work anymore, because what the types of films that people were making were changing. So if Brian Grazer, whose company Imagine was founded on comedies and some pretty good ones and some very successful ones, is kind of adrift as to what's working in the world of comedy, that's a scary notion. I would hope that something that is high concept and seems like it has broad audience appeal would be makeable, but I don't know. It's certainly more of a challenge than it used to be.
Now, Amanda, you've seen films before, so, but more seriously,
Oh my God, what do you need, a victim here to like?
how often do you go out to the theater? So set aside the pandemic insofar as you can. Like, are you and your family actually like going out and seeing movies
No,
very
never.
often?
Nope. Haven't been to an actual movie for many years.
And why is that?
Because I like the convenience of watching on my TV. Also, I like to study movies, so it's not enough to go just see it just once. I want to watch it 2, 3, 4, 10 times before I'll be satisfied. So, yeah.
See, I'm very partial to the actual experience of being in there with a giant screen and a crowd surrounding me, and the idea that like something magical could happen. Probably won't. Probably I'm going to be a little bit disappointed, but there's that feeling in there like this is special. And I mean, one of the things I least like about the pandemic is that for a long time it destroyed that. Mark, what's your take on where we are today?
I feel like, Paul has a much deeper breadth of knowledge about this than I do. And maybe that's why I am on almost the exact opposite point of view. I feel in many respects, Hollywood has always been sort of static. They're always looking for last year's hit. The studios are always looking for formulas that they could plug into and do multiple iterations of that formula so that they can make a lot of money. And that streaming platforms and all the various streaming platforms have created a massive opening for tons of talented people that would have to work their way through a studio system or formal places that would probably not even see them. And now they're getting projects done, by the billions. I mean, they're content galore. You can't even catch up with it. We may not have a variety of content in the cinema, but we have a variety of content that's cinema-esque in the streaming world. And with televisions that are now, the length and breadth of your wall, you're pretty much a home cinema yourself. So they are bringing cinematic actors, cinematic directors, cinematic forces to bear on all this television content. And I think a lot of it is pretty interesting and unusual. The stuff that's not being infected by wokeism, that's artificially placing these barriers on the way, on what we produce and what the content is. But otherwise, I think the characters are more complex. The plots are more interesting. I think we get a chance to see development in the way that we haven't gotten before. It's a little more risque, and there's a lot of it.
But that's me. Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in because I think we almost have to define our terms here. I mean, Don, on some level, talks about. It seems like you're talking about that act of going in and experiencing the projected image with a lot of other people. That process of going to the theater, if you will. And Guy talks. Paul, it sounds like you're talking a little bit more about just the whole process of entertainment itself. On that issue, I'm a little bit more with Mark. It seems like there's an abundance of high quality entertainment now that I'm, as they say, old enough to remember when it was just 4 or 5 TV channels. But Don, on to your point, yeah, I don't really miss. I guess I'm more with Amanda. I don't really miss going into a kind of flea-bitten movie theater and sitting with a bunch of other people who I don't know, who most of them smell like patchouli. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but they all have an odor of some sort, paying for very expensive theater popcorn. So I'm more with Amanda when it comes to that.
Yeah, but then again, watch on the waterfront on a small screen, and then go to a place like the Cinerama Dome, and you'll have a completely different experience of the movie. There really is nothing like it. But today, in 2015, they made a film on an iPhone. It was called Tangerine. Like it or not, but this is the new medium that we're having. Anybody can be a filmmaker now. That means there's going to be a lot of crap. There's always a lot of crap, but that means somebody's going to be able to break through that crap and in a way that they wouldn't have been able to before. They had to jump through the hurdles of getting the right agent, the right representation, the right studio to represent them, and all that crap. They don't have to do that so much anymore.
Yeah. And I think, look, my personal preferences aside, which are probably at least in significant part rooted in the fact that that's the kind of experience I grew up with, right? So there's a nostalgia sort of basis for it. I think in 10 years, the question won't really even be sensible to people because the barrier between, is this a TV, is this a TV show, is this a movie, will have kind of withered away. I mean, we're already getting there, right? Where you, like you said, you have cinematic TV shows, but you also have movies that show up, in your TV in the day of the release. And so I don't necessarily think it's a negative thing. One follow-up question for you though, Jonathan, and feel free anybody else to chime in. But so one of the criticisms has always been that the problems we see in, and let's call it movies and TV, is that it's so driven by commerce. And, the idea is if only producers, studios weren't out to make money, we could get incredible art. And instead we get garbage that appeals to the lowest common denominator. But Jonathan's busy right now, so feel free, anybody.
I think studios have always been driven by a desire to make a return on their investment, which makes sense to me because they wouldn't be in business, I think, largely if they weren't. There have always been more artistic or more daring films that have slipped through the cracks, thank God. But it's not one or the other. They've been doing both throughout their history. Don, can I address an earlier point about the experience? Obviously, tastes change, and obviously what you and I want is not necessarily going to be how it lasts forever. My feeling about the theatrical experience as opposed to streaming or watching something on a giant TV screen or watching something on your phone, which some of my students do, is that I want to be immersed in the experience. I want to be lost in the experience for 2 hours. I want not to be in control of what's going on. I want to be in the writers and directors and actors world for 2 hours. And then I want to come out and I want to talk about it and deal with it. But I grew up watching movies on television, and we had a black and white set when I was a kid. So it's not that I think it's evil or stupid to watch movies somewhere else. It's that there are some films, and I would think of 2001: A Space Odyssey, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Dune, Lawrence of Arabia. To me, if you're watching those films on anything other than a giant screen, you're fooling yourself. You're watching the Cliff Notes version of a movie. You're standing apart from, above, and larger than the experience, as opposed to letting the experience overwhelm you and then coming out the other side and basically going, what happened? What do I like about that? What didn't I like about that? For me, and again, I'm not speaking certainly for the current generation of non-moviegoers, I want to be lost in the film. I want to be at somebody else's mercy for 2 hours, and then I want to deal with what I got. I don't want to stop it because there's a phone call. I don't want to stop it because I'm texting my friends while I'm watching the movie. I want to give myself over to the experience, not be ironic about it, not be superior to it. But that's me.
I agree with you. And I think maybe we have a new technology coming out that may make that possible. Sans the movie theater, and that's maybe the Oculus, maybe that whole virtual experience where you're literally immersed in the thing, maybe the wave of the future.
I like what you said, Paul, about it being control, because that's what I love about being in front of my TV is I'm in control. And that's a huge thing that I've gained versus going to the movies. But now you're making me reconsider. Maybe I need to give myself over to an experience. The problem with that is like, I don't have a lot of trust for a lot of times for what's going to be presented to me. And I get pretty upset when I give myself over to the experience and then someone, I don't know, whoever's in charge, the writer, the director, they do something that makes me feel really bad. Like they don't let the good guy win or, those types of things. And then I think I gave myself over to the experience just to be, crushed a little bit.
Yeah, to you, no, please, Jonathan.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna encourage everyone, Paul, to look up your IMDb. A lot of our super chatters and look up your IMDb history and understand the wealth of material you've worked on and your current work, your historic work. Marilyn said that she saw the Julia Child documentary in November with only 3 people in the theater. She found it very entertaining. Thank you, Marilyn, for your support. Kirk, thank you for your support. Kirk wants to know, Paul, again, knowing all your history, and I want to ask you about one of your films in just a moment, but Kirk wants to know, Paul, what is your favorite movie pre-1980 and what is your favorite movie post-1980? And thank you to all of our super chatters in advance.
Why is 1980
interesting question. Right. Yeah, I don't know. So pre-1980, my 3 favorites would be 2001, Harold and Maude, and The Wizard of Oz. And if I had to come up with one post-1980, the first one that would come to mind is Jojo Rabbit. But there are other excellent films that I've seen. Amanda, I totally get what you're talking about, but to use a bad comparison, to me, it's sort of like falling in love. I would rather fall in love and have it not work out and get hurt by the experience, preferably not physically, and then have the opportunity to fall in love again than always to be safe and always to be sort of removed from it. Most movies that I see, I disagree with philosophically, unfortunately. They're either the exact opposite of what I believe, or they're just tangentially related to what I believe. So I've sort of made my peace with that, unless they're really egregiously evil. I have to be able to find beauty where I can find it, or it's going to be a pretty grim world, unfortunately. So yeah, I get disappointed all the time. Don started out by talking about the notion that 90% of everything is crap or is mediocre. Theodore Sturgeon, who is a science fiction writer, kind of coined what was called Sturgeon's law, which is 90% of everything is crap. And I'm sure he wasn't the first one to come up with that. But yeah, I think most experiences are going to be mediocre. What I do before I go to a movie is I look at the trailer. I might look at the ratings on Rotten Tomatoes to get a notion of if it's going to be awful or not. But other than that, I want to go in not knowing about the marketing, not knowing about the stars, not knowing what the ending of the movie is. I want the opportunity to be disappointed, because often I'm not, and if 60% of the time I'm disappointed, there's 30% of the time where the film lives up to my expectations and 10% where it exceeds them. And as somebody who loves movies, I can't imagine trading my favorite movies, the experience of seeing them on a huge screen for anything else. But I should shut up, and I will.
Well, let me just take a counterpoint to not what you said, Paul, but just the whole idea. To me, it's a miracle that any movie is good. And I say that because, as a novelist, I know how hard it is to create a good novel as a single person who can make everything fit my vision, make all the choices. I don't have to write by committee. And yet screenwriting and the creation of movies and TV is inherently and properly a collaborative venture between many, many different creators. And so to me, the thing is, it's amazing when anything has a vision to it and is not just completely, what could we get past a committee? What do you guys have any insights on just that dynamic in filmmaking?
Well, not only that, from an actor's point of view, the technical aspect of making films is almost conspires at every step of the way against a human experience. So the fact that you can have a human experience in the context of the technical aspects of making a film is also a miracle. It's a miracle that it gets written. It's a miracle that it gets produced. It's a miracle that all of these forces are working together to make something good. And it's a miracle that human thing happens in front of this artifice that we call the camera.
Well, can you concretize that a little bit? Because I think some of us don't know that much about filmmaking. What's some of the things that you would put under artifice?
An example. I did a show that Guy Ritchie was directing, and he's very flamboyant with his camera. Sometimes it becomes the character of the piece, which I think is a little bit unfortunate. But I was having a conversation with somebody across the table. Now, in real life, it has the rhythm of conversation. It's you and I, giving and taking thoughts, exploring each other, and it has a certain rhythm to it. He had placed tracks around our table, and we could only respond to the other when this revolving camera that was spinning around on these tracks came off of our partner's back. So it did not have the rhythm of conversation. It didn't have the immediacy or the pinch and ouch that you get from actually talking to each other, because you had to hold your impulses for the time that you were working around the camera, which I don't think is, most good directors don't do that. They have their thing. They let the actor, they find their way to do the camera around the actors. But sometimes you have to do that kind of stuff, which is really artificial, and you have to be really on top of your game so that it doesn't feel that way or look that way.
Don, I totally agree with your point. It's a miracle that movies don't all suck. There are so many things that can go wrong. After years of being a writer, last year I had the opportunity to write and direct 3 short films. It was the first time I directed films. And you look at the dailies, you look at the footage, the first assembly of footage, and you're going, holy crap, what idiot did this? What criminal can I prosecute for this? If you don't edit the crap out of it, if you don't remove all the stuff that doesn't work and all the pauses and all of that, if you don't have the world's best composer helping you, you have no idea how embarrassing it can be if everything doesn't come together well. It's so easy to make mistakes that can kill your film. One of the films that I'm credited with co-writing, the director, to my mind, took what was supposed to be a comedy and made a lugubrious semi-comedy drama out of it, because the shots were long and languorous and the pace was even slower than this. And I thought, holy crap, did you know this was a comedy? Because it's certainly not anymore. And all he had to do was have a slow pace, and in my mind, there goes the film. That kind of stuff happens all the time. There's a disconnect often between writers and directors, where instead of interpreting the writer's vision, the director sees it as his or her job to impose his or her own vision. Sometimes it's a better vision, but it's often not the same vision. And so the piece is going in two different directions. Absolutely, this is a collective, filmmaking is a collective endeavor, but you sort of need one dominant vision, and it should be the right vision, basically.
Yeah. No, and I think, I mean, one interesting thing, I've started studying screenwriting alongside novels because I think it's an interesting challenge. The author of my favorite thriller novel, Terry Hayes, who is a Hollywood guy, said in the introduction, the difference was, with screenwriting, it was like trying to swim in a bathtub. With novels, it's like trying to swim in the ocean. So I like that challenge. But one of the striking things to me was how good most screenplays were. I mean, not what your cousin comes up with, but in terms of stuff that's actually like getting circulated, it's at least like well written, and it's really hard to do something that even will get, read past the first page. And so I think a lot of when we sit back in a theater and go, like, man, anybody can make it as a screenwriter. What's often happening is that kind of clashing of visions or things not getting executed right just because of the challenge in pulling off something as complex as a movie. So one thing that you raised, Mark, that I'd like to hear people's thoughts on and expansion on is the way that setting aside kind of artistic difficulties or the kind of way in which it's more profitable to produce that, billion-dollar Marvel movie is kind of politicization, you guys know the word, injecting politics and particularly kind of woke ideas into film. I have an amazing ability not to get bothered by that. I mean, this goes to your point, Paul. I'm so desperate for things that just bring me into a cool, interesting world. Like my favorite filmmaker, and I'm not that original in this, but is Tarantino, not because his stories are inspiring, but just because that world is so interesting and different and vivid and colorful. But in any case, I have this huge tolerance for things that are, against me philosophically. And so I'm not quite bothered by this stuff. I worry about it when it undermines the art, which I think can often happen when it's more about we need to get across a message that makes us look like good people than it is the actually creating good art. I don't even have a good sense of how much this is happening because I'm a little blind to it. Any thoughts on like where are we in terms of art becoming injected with bad ideas and that taking over the quality of storytelling?
We're not in a good place. It's very difficult to get things made that are not consistent with wokeism. And I don't know if that's going to maintain or get worse or at some point get better. One of the things that Mark is pointing out is with all the streaming and all the opportunities out there, there are opportunities for people to do something that's different. The people who can finance things that are expensive as opposed to something that you can shoot on your phone, unfortunately, largely share the woke anti-philosophy philosophy. So it's very hard to get past the gatekeepers. This is affecting casting. It's affecting writers. I had a friend who was represented by an agent who basically said, I can't get you work. And the reason was he didn't meet the diversity qualifications. So this is going to have an effect on what it is that we're seeing. To use just one example, my wife and I were big fans of the TV show Supergirl years ago when it started out. It was a presentation of the hero as heroic, as somebody who loved her abilities and did good things with her abilities. And somewhere 4 or 5 seasons in, they discovered wokeism. And it's like, I had liked so much about the show, but I just didn't want to be lectured by these people whose ideology I find foul. So we had to stop watching.
What do you think, Mark? You're this is obviously something that is of deep concern to you. You know, where are we, and what do you think the prospects are for the next 5 years of TV and film?
Next 5 years, I agree. I agree with Paul. It is significant. It is a significant factor in determining what projects are getting made. I just read for a horror film. Of course, the monster is a white guy, cult leader, and the protagonist is a Black woman with MS who's quite well off. She's been an established writer since the age of 16, so she's been blessed. But at least every act says something about how awful the white misogynistic American culture is. I mean, I could have done with one. I didn't need to see 4 or 5. We already have the main antagonist, a cliche white supremacist apocalyptic cult leader. So it's very intensely chauvinistic and racist, and in another direction. This is sort of the new blacklist that they're putting out there, and people like Paul and I sort of fall into that category. And it is far more dangerous, I think, than the previous one, since those writers could get pseudonyms and write and still be successful. It's much harder for us, I think, especially for me on camera, to change my identity unless I choose to embrace some intersection that puts me now on a different scale of victimhood, which I won't do. So in that respect, it's tough. In another respect, you know, there is a sense in which Hollywood was a bigoted, chauvinistic, misogynistic place, and really did lock out people of color and people who were different, outside the box, who were very interesting. And we are getting an opportunity to see some of these people rise to the surface, and we're getting to see their talents in a way that we might not have before. They're just doing it in such a profoundly stupid way. But I'm grateful to see some people that I might not have been able to see otherwise. Now just open it up. I mean, Ayn Rand was able to make bad guys and good guys, bad guys and good guys about the ideas that they held. So they weren't bad or good because of who they were, what they were, by accident of their genes or birth or economic station. They were good or bad based on their ideas, and nobody was denigrated to build somebody up. If you watch a show like what's that show based on The Bachelor? There was a show that went for about 4 seasons based on The Bachelor. All the men are stupid, misogynistic creeps. There's not one single decent man in the piece, and the women are fighting this stupid, misogynistic machine all the time. That's just obtuse. And as good as the acting is, I can't take it. You know, I watched 2 seasons and I'm like, I'm done.
There's that wonderful moment, and I'll play it with everyone's permission, Don, especially with your permission. It's very short, when Donahue asks Ayn Rand about what she likes, and she says,
Jerry Schwartz of the Atlanta Constitution wrote, in which you said you were all over the lot. You liked Charlie's Angels.
Yes.
But because why?
Because it's the only romantic television show today. It's not realistic. It's not about the gutter. It's not about the half-wit, retarded children and all the other kind of shows today. It's about 3 attractive girls doing impossible things. And because they're impossible, that's what makes it interesting. It shows...
We'll cut it there. I don't want to waste too much time, but I thought that was such a wonderful, apropos, Paul, about what you're saying about the types of things you love. Miss Rand loved Charlie's Angels. 3 attractive girls doing impossible, exciting things. Sounds like a good show.
Yeah, that's why I like the show Lupin. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yes.
So it's about a guy who grew up emulating this master thief. Well, he sort of takes those talents and does impossible things. He's a thief, but he's doing it to bad people, you know, in the way that Robin Hood, the real Robin Hood, like in the speech that you gave, Paul, that was so good. I wish more people could read what you sent in the email. That character I enjoy watching because he's doing something palpably impossible and he gets away with it, and it's beautiful. Or Sherlock can do the same thing, and those are inspiring, great pieces.
It would be great if the lesson learned from previous discrimination were not, let's discriminate against the other side, but rather, hey, what if we were not to discriminate on the basis of, say, color?
Yeah, hello. That's too easy.
And I want to ask Paul about one other thing that I know was active in his history, and that is, you were, I won't share it now. I can't seem to find it, but you worked on a show that is legendary. You worked on a movie that is legendary. That talk about a meme. I mean, this was a meme before even people knew what memes were. I can just share this image, and people know exactly what this is. And according to your bio, you worked, in your words, you polished up the Never-Ending Story, which is, for me, as
took him forever.
He's still working on it.
Still polishing it.
I'm going to steal that.
This is a legendary show, and one that still provides, I mean, what was it like being part of a meme and being part of something now that is still popular 30 plus years on? That's
right.
Cool unto itself.
So my contribution was perhaps interesting, but perhaps peripheral. So let me quickly do it. I was working at a film distribution and marketing company, and we had acquired the rights to the Never-Ending Story. And we got the screenplay, and it had been written by, I think, Herman Weigel and Wolfgang Petersen, who were the directors, and they're German gentlemen. So the screenplay that we got read like it had been translated that morning from the German, because it had. And our job was to find financing and a U.S. distributor, a U.S. studio, to match the foreign funds so the movie could actually get made. So my boss, Mark Damon, who is a former actor, knew that I was interested in becoming a screenwriter. And he said, do you want to take a crack at polishing the script? And I said, absolutely. This is going to be so cool. This is going to be the best 2 weeks of my life. He says, you've got 36 hours. I said, oh, sure. So I pulled the first and only all-nighter of my life. I took the screenplay and I went into my office and I took this non-idiomatic Germanic translated English and tried to make it flow like people would really speak, unlike the way I'm speaking now. And after about half an hour, my boss called me into his office, and he had a bunch of his executives there. And he said, read what you have so far. And I said, out loud? And he said, yeah, that'd be a good idea. So I read what I had written so far. And for the first and only time in my life, except for my wedding night, I got a round of applause. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a good gig, this screenwriting thing. So I went back to my office, and in the remainder of the 36 hours, did the polish, and they sold the script, or they got the financing for the script. They lined up Warner Brothers. I've never sat down with my polish to see how much, if any of it, they used in the final film. I've got no idea. But I'm hoping that the changes that I made were partly responsible for Warner Brothers picking up and financing it and turning it into a movie.
Well, just among your very impressive credits, so very cool that you had even a part in that legendary 80s film. So proud of you on that one, especially.
I'm so not an essential part of it that I'm allowed to say, what a cool film. It's so unlike other movies. It's not like every other fantasy that's made. There's kind of a Germanic influence, and there's real sadness in that picture. There's sadness when the horse dies. There's sadness in some of the characters, and you're going, you might like the film or dislike it, but wow, it's really a different piece of cinema.
I just watched it like last week. It's awesome. This is different, and it's dramatic. And you're right. When the horse dies, that's real.
Yeah,
I don't know that they would do that anymore.
Right,
it's like, wow.
The horse would survive. The horse would foal instead of drowning.
Well, I think that's a good way to transition to, I want everybody to think of some of their favorite TV or movies. Let's call it from the 21st century. In the meantime, Jonathan, do we have any messages from our supporters?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, there you go.
Oh, thank you, Don. We have a lot of people are really responding to so much of what Paul is mentioning. Kirk said that Paul's Never-Ending Story is why movies seem miraculous. It's a business. Movies are the businessman's art. That's an interesting perspective, interesting way of putting it. Rat Lover said, yes, I think maybe it would work better if they were fighting misogynistic individuals, but phasing the men who are not misogynistic. That was maybe interesting take on that. Enric says, what disappoints me on most films is that the first act is often good and engaging, but by the end of the third act, it reverts to do ex machina. That's probably a problem with most writing. Shazbot asks, do any of you enjoy the they're so bad they're good movies on occasion?
Wait,
maybe we'll throw that around. And then
I'm hung up on that one question, so maybe Paul can answer it. What does he mean?
Sure, we'll pause there.
By
We'll
the
go
end of
back to
that
the rest.
movie? What is it, Paul? Eventually, Deus Ex Machina. What does he mean by the
that means the God from the machine. So that means that instead, so theoretically in Greek drama, in Act 5, in the 5-act plays, the humans would be struggling with each other or with gods for the first 4 acts, and in the 5th act, a god would come on stage, being wheeled on stage, which is the machine, and would solve the problem. So that's, even though the Greeks are fairly well known for their writing, we've now decided that that's a bad way to write, and that the protagonist and antagonist should solve their problems themselves rather than having somebody come from left field and solve the problems. Okay. So today it's considered a very bad style of writing.
Okay, copy that.
So screw Homer.
Allison said that the movie theater atmosphere keeps me at home. She's tired of seeing cell phones all around during the movie. It doesn't matter where she sits. It sounds like you, Amanda. It's kind of you on that one as well. Thank you for your contribution as well, Allison. Seth says, I often find myself frustrated by the philosophical undertones and undercutting of heroism in most films. Paul, how do you deal with that? Thank you, Seth, for your contribution as well.
I hate it. I rage against the dying of the light. I look at, I bothered Mark with a copy of a piece that I had written for a magazine a couple of years ago, in which I was talking about the various iterations of Superman and what's happened to Superman on the screen. When I was a kid, a TV show called Adventures of Superman was in reruns, and he was a heroic figure. He was kind of a dad figure if you were a little kid. Then in 1978, there was the Christopher Reeve Superman directed by Richard Donner, where he's a completely heroic, non-ironic character, where he says he stands for truth, justice, and the American way, and it's not a laugh line, where he says to Lois Lane, Lois, I never lie. And it actually sent chills up my spine, because a human being, well, he's an alien, is actually saying that with no sense of irony. It's like, no, that's the correct way to be. You actually shouldn't lie. And then in some of the more recent iterations of Superman, he's this godlike figure who hates the fact that he's a godlike figure and is incredibly distressed about his powers and is given Hamlet-like indecision about whether or not to use them. I'm going, you are ruining Superman. Do that to Batman. Batman is the Dark Knight. He is allowed to be divided. He was the guy who was driven into doing what he was doing because his parents were murdered by bad guys. Superman is not that. Superman is the corn-fed Kansas farm boy who embraces his parents' values. So screw up somebody else's hero. Don't do that to Superman.
But now they call him a cis farm boy.
There you go.
And they'd have to throw in cis to it
like that
as well.
I mean, you look at the evolution or devolution of James Bond when Barbara Broccoli kind of took over the series. And, you can certainly say that the Sean Connery Bond has elements that are not wonderfully PC, and I would agree with you. At the same time, if you turn James Bond into a family man, that's not James Bond. It's a different character. So do that with a different character. There are certain reasons that people have been attracted to James Bond over the years. If you don't like them, don't make James Bond movies. Make up some other hero. That's fine. But don't subvert the few kind of iconic figures that represent, whether it's masculinity or what once were American values or heroism or whatever. Do that with somebody else's figures.
I love that. Anything else, Jonathan?
Yeah. Luke, thank you for the pounds. And we have our contributions and our viewers done. I know it goes without saying, we have really a global community here. And Ayn Rand talked about the collective as, that was always tongue in cheek. I think that was the name I don't think she gave, but of her students and her colleagues, if you were her friends. So it's so great to see that we have this hangout, this collective from all over the world. Luke von Egerath, says Damien Chazelle from Whiplash and La La Land comes to mind as a filmmaker who promotes passionate value pursuit in his movies. And I know Dr. Peikoff loved Whiplash. That was one he talked about quite a bit.
Well, I'm viciously angry now because that was going to be one of mine that I was going to raise. Whiplash, for anybody who's achieved anything difficult, or I shouldn't say anybody, I know some people who have and don't like it because they find it too malevolent, but for many of us who've achieved something difficult, the movie really resonates.
Whiplash is great from a teacher's perspective. When I begin each term, I ask my students what they thought of Whiplash. And I tell them I think the teacher was a little bit too lenient.
Quickly
great.
going
We'll
back
circle-
to finish from Mosh. Robert, thank you, says he has some sympathy for Amanda's point. It's okay if art takes you into a dark place as long as it doesn't leave you there. And Kirk mentions you had talked about JoJo. He says he's seen that half a dozen times already. And thank you to all of our super chatters.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so yeah, let's dive in. And Amanda, I want to start with you. These don't have to be what you think are the greatest stories ever made, the ones that are most important to you, but just anything that occurs to you that are kind of fun or moving movies that you think have come out in the past. Well, I guess 22 doesn't seem short anymore. The 21st century's been around for a while, but you guys take my point.
Oh no, so I missed the time frame, so I'm gonna go back. Sorry. My favorite movie is Real Genius. I love that movie because it's just this fun adventure story about good versus evil, and like the professor in that film. He's evil because he doesn't want the geniuses to even have fun at a party. And in the end, the evil is defeated by popcorn. And I just love that sense of the world. So that's my number one favorite movie. And I don't know, is Star Trek count? Is that come out since 2000? I love watching Star Trek. Again, because of the sense of adventure, and also because they're up in space and they're tooling around the universe, and there's all these alien species, but they have the same dreams and hopes and aspirations and problems that I have, and I like seeing the fantasy of that. So that's where and I right now I'm studying the movie All the President's Men, so I watch that movie again and again and try to get everything I can out of it. So
awesome. All right, Jonathan, you're up.
My top that comes to mind and sticks with me, and I have to say I love documentary, is Man on Wire. Does anyone remember this one? This was the documentary made about the gentleman, I think his name is Philippe Petit, who walked between the Twin Towers in the 1970s. There was actually a feature made about that later by some Hollywood guys, but this is the actual documentary about it. I love it. It is so motivating to me. It was all done on the down low. It was done. He had to sneak in, but he had a vision of doing this as a kid, and he had seen the Twin Towers, and he drew a line between them. And it talks about the immense planning that goes into it, and he wanted to see this beautiful achievement made. And to me, it's an incredibly inspiring story, especially given what happened ultimately to the Twin Towers. So definitely top of my list is Man on Wire. I don't know if anyone saw it.
Yeah. No, I did, and I loved it. I thought you were going to say Man on Fire, which is a Denzel movie, which is amazing in its own right, in my opinion. But no, Man on Wire was surprisingly moving for something as kind of like almost circusy on the face of it, as walking across a tight wire.
Yeah, totally. It was so what about the rest of the crew here?
Well, I'll give just a couple that I think I really like. So I was going to mention Whiplash, but Moneyball is the only movie I know that's basically, let's write about epistemology and put that into a film. Because it's basically all about the methodology that was used in baseball, where they brought in statistics to start making decisions about players, and it led to all of these counterintuitive results. And it just has some incredible acting by Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill, amongst others. But I just love the idea that we're going to take a story that's about statistics and we're going to make it fascinating. And the book was amazing, but if you read the book, it wouldn't be at all clear how to turn it into a movie, because it's not really. It's Michael Lewis is an incredible writer, but the way he tells it, I had no clue how they were going to make it into a movie. And so it was one of these things where you had this amazing initial product. hey, I'm going to write a book about statistics and make it interesting. And then somebody who figured out, hey, how do I take a book about statistics and make that into a visual movie that's going to be fascinating? And I just think that's a really cool achievement. And another one I'll mention, this is more mainstream, but I sometimes forget about it. And then when I remember, I go, oh my God, that was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had, which is Up, the first 5 to 10 minutes segment, which I just think is some of the most powerful storytelling, and it is in a children's cartoon. And so that's one that I try to revisit every year or two.
In which film? Sorry.
Up.
Isn't that, Don? It's funny. That montage has its own Wikipedia entry. It's its own. That first, as you said, 10 or 15 minutes. Does it leave you dark? Does it leave you, sad? I mean, it's often talked about as being so sad. Does it leave you that, or how does it leave you when you get to the end of that montage? Basically shows this couple's life, all the early days, the happiness, and then it.
See, I view it a little bit differently, because I don't think you can view it in isolation, because it's sad. But then the whole point of the movie is that, no, it's not really sad, because they had that life together, and that like, it's not how it ends. It's that adventure that they went on that was the meaning of it. And I think that's a hard perspective to achieve in life. Because most things we think of, it's a process that leads to an end we're trying to achieve. And so I was actually I said this on Twitter the other day. Amongst writers, there's this famous quote. I forget what the author was, but it's, I don't like writing, I like having written. And a lot of authors will say this. I said, that's the most absurd thing in the world. What do you like, living or having lived? And to me, it's the same thing. And I think the real, the whole story of Up, and the reason why I don't think it's jarring that we move from this intentionally, emotional beginning into the rest of it, is the rest of it is telling us, what should we think about that first part? Was it a tragedy or was it not? And I think what you get by the end is, no, that was not a tragedy. It was a beautiful life. And now the guy's in the position to appreciate it and go on and write the next chapter. Mark, I will save you for last.
Save me for last?
No, we're going to save Paul for last. As our special guest, he gets all of the extra time to think.
Well, oh my God, there's so many to choose from. It's really difficult.
If he picks an American Pie sequel, guys, I'm gonna flip out.
No, I mean, there's so many interesting and inspiring films out there for me. I'm gonna pick. I love Tarantino's revisionist histories. Django Unchained and Inglourious Bastards and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because he sort of lampoons evil in the way that Jojo Rabbit lampooned Hitler, and I think that's really, really valuable and good. I loved The Revenant, even though it is brutal in a lot of ways. It's stark, it's savage, but it is the willpower of one man against not only nature but these other forces, and he's going to win. And it's a pretty powerful film for me in a lot of ways, and filmed in some very original, frightening perspective from some perspectives that I had never seen before. I think that director is pretty great for his ability to cinematically bring something to life. There's a billion of them I think I could come up with that are interesting in a lot of ways. Go ahead, Paul.
I think these are a ton of interesting choices. I saw Real Genius in the 80s when it came out. I remember nothing about it except, boy, I like that film. That was Val Kilmer, right?
Yeah, Val Kilmer.
And there was a Val Kilmer documentary that came out this year that I thought was really interesting and really worth watching. You're looking at All the President's Men now. In 1976, for me, there were three top films. There was All the President's Men and Network and Rocky. And I thought All the President's Men was magnificent. You're watching people in a newsroom typing and chasing a story, and we know the ending to the story. And my God, what a thriller, what a riveting way to tell that story. I thought that was great. I'm also a big fan of the Star Trek reboot, the first one that J.J. Abrams did. I was a huge Trekkie, and this was a different Star Trek, but for me, it captured the joy of friendship and camaraderie and exploring the universe.
Yeah.
And it was exhilarating. I saw it a couple times. A couple other films, and this isn't a best of, this is the ones that just came to mind. The Dark Knight, I thought, was, after Superman, the best comic book movie I've ever seen. It had, in my mind, real complexity, and good complexity, and really interesting moral issues. The best film I saw this year was Belfast. I recommend that one, the Kenneth Branagh film. And from a couple years ago, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. And I always tell my students, don't write about cancer, because nobody's going to go see your cancer movie. And I've seen 3 great cancer movies in my life, despite that. And Me and Earl and the Dying Girl,
Great film.
I fell in love with those characters. I'm a wet mess watching this girl die, and the friendships that are around her. The Up thing kills me. If I had to, I talk about the 4 minutes from Up to my students all the time, because I think it was a wordless montage. I've only seen the film once. You're conveying, with non-actors, with representations of human beings, in 4 minutes, without dialogue, an entire lifetime, an entire love story, in 4 minutes. Most movies can't tell half of the story in 2 hours. And you're going, how the fuck can you do that? It is so good. If I wanted to justify movies as an art form to people who were hostile to it, those might be the 4 minutes I would pick. Because if you are impervious to those 4 minutes, you're clearly not a human being.
Amen. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Thursday Collective. Jonathan, do you happen to know what's coming up today? Because I, as always, am not misinformed. No, nobody lied to me about the agenda today, but I don't happen to know what it is.
Well, whatever's coming up is due to the thanks of support for people like Steven, who likes Glengarry Glen Ross, which is a favorite of mine, and Mary Aline, who agrees with you about Moneyball. So, my best recommendation is for Life on Earth with Robert at 10 p.m. UK. Talk about enjoying life on Earth. Robert and Amy specialize in that. So become a member and a subscriber of the Ayn Rand Center UK. You get to, interact with people like Paul, really successful objectivists, fans of Ayn Rand, followers of her work, who've done such interesting things. So thank you for your support. And Paul, thank you again for taking some time with us. I hope you'll come back again. And I know the whole panel enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And just for our members, a reminder that Boot Week is canceled this week, but we should be back next week. So thanks again to the panelists. Thanks again to our special guest, Paul. And thanks to you who are listening. We will talk next time.
Bye.
Bye.